Okay, so I'm going to start by explaining the bony structures on the scapula. So we have the coracoid process, which comes out anteriorly from the glenoid cavity, which is where the humerus attaches to the scapula. And then we have the supraglenoid tubercle, which is on top. You can't see it too well on this skeleton, but it's at the 12 o'clock position. And then at the 6 o'clock position at the bottom is the infraglenoid tubercle. And so on the actual scapula, we have the spine, which isn't shown here, but it's like right there. And then it has the supraspinous fossa, and then the infraspinous fossa below it. And then we have the acromoid process up here, and then the superior border, the medial border over here, and then the lateral border on the other side. And then the coracoid process, which I already talked about, is up there. And then we have the infraglenoid tubercle, which you can't really see either, but it's there. And then the subscapular fossa is kind of like the base. So with the humerus, we have the head, the proximal head, which is just basically this, and then the distal head's down there. And we have the greater tubercle, which is the bigger bump on the head, and then the lesser tubercle is the other smaller bump. And then in between them is the intertubular groove. And then we have the deltoid tubercle, which is down here somewhere. It's not really prominent on the skeleton. And then we have the coronoid fossa down here where the other arm bones attach, and then the medial epicondyle, and then the lateral epicondyle. And then the capitulum is also down here as well. And then the trochlea as well. So then starting with some of the muscles by the rotator cuff, the serratus anterior has a medial attachment point at the medial edge of the scapula, so back here. And then the lateral attachment points are ribs 1 through 9, so those. And then the levitator scapulae is a flattened cylinder, has flattened cylinder type striations, and it's on the back. And the superior and medial attachment points are the transverse processes of the C1 through 4 vertebrae. And then the inferior and lateral attachment points are the medial border of the scapula as well. And then the trapezius is the really large, and its striations are flat, but it's like a large triangular muscle, and it has 3 parts. So the superior medial attachment point is the occipital bone, and then the lateral attachment point of that is the medial border of the acromoid process of the scapula. And then for the middle part, the medial attachment point is the spinous processes of the C7 and the T1 through 3 vertebrae. And then the lateral attachment point is the upper border of the crest of the scapular spine, so up here. And then the inferior part of the trapezius, the medial attachment point, is the spinous processes of T4 through T12 vertebrae, so farther down. And then the lateral attachment point is the upper border of the crest of the scapular spine as well. Okay, so next we have the latissimus dorsi. So the medial attachment points are the spinous processes of the vertebrae T1 through 7, so on the back where the spine is, and then the ribs, and then ribs 9 through 12, and then the iliac crest. And then the lateral attachment points are the intertubular groove of the humerus, so over here. And then next, moving on to the deltoid muscles, they also have 3 parts like the trapezius, and the deltoid's a very thick triangular muscle, and different parts of the muscles kind of do different things. So the anterior part, the superior attachment point is the clavicle, the inferior attachment point is the deltoid tuberosity of the humerus. And then the lateral part is the superior attachment point is the acromion process, so kind of over by the scapula. And then the inferior attachment point is the deltoid tuberosity of the humerus. And then the posterior part of the rotator cuff muscles, we have the supraspinatus, which is a cylindrical muscle, and it sits in a depression of where its name originates from. So the medial attachment point is the supraspinous fossa of the scapula, so up here above the spine, and then the lateral attachment point is the greater tubercle of the humerus, and then the infraspinatus is also a triangular, or it's triangular, not cylindrical, but it also sits in the fossa of the name that it originates. So the medial attachment point of that is the infraspinous fossa of the scapula, so down below the spine, and then the lateral attachment point is the greater tubercle of the humerus. So then the teres minor is a flattened small triangular muscle, and the medial attachment point is the lateral border of the scapula, so over on this edge. And then the lateral attachment point is also the greater tubercle of the humerus. And then lastly, the subscapularis is also a flat triangular muscle, and its medial attachment point is the subscapular fossa. Okay, so next we have the triceps brachii, and that means that they have 3 heads. And so they're long and lateral, and then they're also cylindrical and then deep to the deltoid muscles. So the proximal attachment points are the infragleneus tubercle, the posterior humerus, so the back right here, and then the distal attachment points are the olecranon process of the ulna, so over on this front forearm bone. So then talking about muscles of the forearm, we first have the flexor digitorum profundus, which is fairly thick, and it's a flattened cylinder on the anterior aspect of the forearm. So the proximal attachment point is the proximal 3/4 of the ulna, so kind of like this whole part right here. And then the distal attachment points are the distal phalanges of digits 2 through 5. So if this is your thumb, it would be the rest of these other digits, and it would be the distal part of it. And then the extensor digitorum is also a cylindrical muscle, but it's on the posterior part of the forearm, so kind of back under here. And then the proximal attachment point is the lateral epicondyle, so up here. And then the distal attachment point is also... Okay, so then talking about the ligaments of kind of the shoulder bone, we first have the acromiocabular ligament, and that connects the acromion process to the clavicle, so up here and then back over here. Then next the coracomial ligament connects the coracoid and the acromion processes, so those are kind of both just over here on the lateral end of the scapula. And then the coraclavier ligament connects the coracoid process and the clavicle, so kind of similar to the acromiocabular ligament. And then the coracohumeral ligament, connects the inferior part of the coracoid process, so over here, and then combines with the supraspinous tendons. And then the articular capsule. So then the last thing is the glenoid labrum, which is on the glenoid cavity, so where the humerus connects to the scapula, and it's just cartilage that goes around it to make the glenoid cavity slightly. So how I go about figuring out the action of a new muscle, especially one that I'm not familiar with, is I kind of do what I believe went over in class, where you put one hand or one finger at one point and then another finger at another attachment point, and you kind of think about what would bring them closer together if the muscle contracts or shortens. So for example, if there was a muscle on the greater tubercle of the humerus and then its other attachment point was on the radius or the ulna, if you think about what would get those closer together, you would have to bend the arm up or flex it. And then another example of a different kind of movement, if there was a muscle kind of like on the occipital bone it attached, and then the other attachment point was farther down here, so kind of like the trapezius muscle. What would get those closer together is to rotate the head superiorly upwards to get it closer to the muscle down there.